My fiancée slept with my best friend while I planned our future, so I ghosted them both and bought the house she always wanted. I'm a 29-year-old guy, and for most of my life, I believed loyalty meant building a future piece by piece. That line has been the backbone of every decision I've ever made, especially when it came to my fiancée, Lila. I used to wake up before dawn, force myself out of bed, and put in extra hours just so I could save enough to buy the dream house she always talked about, the one with the white porch, the skylights, and the perfect place for morning coffee. I'd picture her face lighting up when I handed her the keys, and that thought alone kept me grinding even on days my body screamed to slow down. Lila and I had this unspoken arrangement. I handled the planning, the stability, the money, and she handled the social life, the charm, the emotional spark. I never complained because I felt like we complemented each other, my practicality, her energy. But lately, I started noticing a shift. She'd say things like, "I just need more time with my friends," or "I've been feeling disconnected." Her tone wasn't cold, just distant enough that I convinced myself she was stressed, maybe overwhelmed with the idea of settling down. I tried not to think too much about it. I even shared my worries with Jonah, my best friend. Jonah, the guy who could walk into any room and instantly be everyone's favorite. He'd clap me on the back and say things like, "Bro, you're doing everything right. Lila's lucky." His reassurance always calmed me because Jonah knew me better than anyone. I trusted him with secrets I wouldn't even tell Lila. One evening, I drove past the neighborhood where I hoped our future home would be, letting the sunset wash over the rooftops. The air felt warm, peaceful, full of promise. I remember gripping the steering wheel and thinking, damn. I'm really about to build something beautiful. I didn't realize something ugly was already growing behind me, quietly waiting to unravel everything. I wish I could say the shift was sudden, but it wasn't. It was slow, so slow that at first, I convinced myself I was imagining things. Lila started guarding her phone like it held state secrets. She used to toss it on the couch, face up, with zero worry. Now it was always face down, always on silent, and always tucked under her thigh or slipped into her back pocket the moment I walked into the room. I asked once, lightly, "Everything okay?" and she shot back, "Why wouldn't it be? Are you checking up on me now?" Her tone stung more than I expected. I laughed it off, raising my hands. "Nah, just asking." Inside, though, something tightened. Still, I told myself she was just stressed, maybe overwhelmed with wedding stuff. That's what good partners do, right? They give grace. They assume the best. Around the same time, Jonas started acting off. He'd cancel our usual weekend hangouts, claiming he was exhausted from work. One night, I called him just to vent about how distant Lila seemed, and he sounded nervous, like he wanted to get off the phone fast. "Bro, I'm sure it's nothing," he muttered. "Women just go through phases. Don't overthink it." Then he followed it with a rushed, "I'll talk to you later," and hung up. The weird part? Jonah never rushed me off the phone. Not in 10 years of friendship. I tried telling myself I was paranoid. I kept working overtime, imagining the moment I'd unlock the door to that dream house and show Lila I meant every promise I ever made. The thought soothed me, but only temporarily. Because every time I looked at her, smiling at her phone, texting someone with her back turned to me, coming home an hour later than she said, I felt something inside me whisper, something isn't right. I just didn't know how wrong things were about to get. The more distant Lila became, the harder I pushed myself to make our future feel real. I thought maybe if she saw the house, her house, everything would snap back into place. So I started spending my evenings driving around neighborhoods she used to gush about. I'd park outside homes with wraparound porches, freshly painted shutters, and big front windows that glowed warmly at night. I'd sit there imagining us inside, her decorating the living room, me setting up a grill in the backyard, both of us laughing about how far we'd come. One night, after a long shift, I found a place that felt perfect. The moment I stepped out of my car, the air smelled like pine and fresh paint, and the wind carried this soft quiet that made my chest loosen. I walked the property with the realtor the next morning, running my fingers along the banister, imagining Lila climbing those stairs barefoot, humming the way she did when she was happy. "This is it," I whispered to myself. "This is going to fix everything." Meanwhile, Lila's enthusiasm for wedding planning was drying up. Every time I mentioned venues, guest lists, colors, basic things, she'd wave her hand. "I'm just overwhelmed," she'd sigh. "Can we not talk about this right now?" I'd nod and say, "Of course. Whatever you need." But inside, I felt this quiet ache. Like I was losing her one unspoken moment at a time. I tried talking to Jonah, hoping for reassurance, but he barely picked up my calls anymore. When he did, he sounded distracted, giving half-hearted responses. At one point, I joked, "Dude, you're harder to reach than Lila." He laughed nervously and said, "Yeah, man, busy week." Still, I kept the house a secret. I wanted that one grand gesture. That one moment where everything made sense again. I didn't realize the future I was trying so hard to build was already collapsing behind my back. It happened on a Thursday evening, one of those nights where the air feels heavy for no clear reason. I got off work early because a client canceled, and instead of telling Lila, I decided to surprise her with her favorite takeout. I remember walking down the hallway, balancing the food in my hands, hearing this low whisper coming from our bedroom. At first, I thought she was watching a show, but the tone, it wasn't laughter or casual conversation. It was tense, rushed, almost urgent. I paused outside the door and heard her say, "You can't call me like this, he might come home." My heart went still. Completely still. I pushed the door open slightly, just enough to see her sitting on the edge of the bed, phone pressed tightly to her ear, her back hunched like she was guarding the conversation. The second she noticed the door move, she jumped. It's work," she blurted, cheeks flushing red. "Just a coworker freaking out about deadlines." I set the food down slowly and said, "Didn't mean to scare you." She forced a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "You didn't. I'm just tired." The room felt thick with something I couldn't name, like a scent you recognize but can't identify. A heaviness. A warning. She avoided my gaze the entire time we ate, rambling about random things while her eyes flicked toward her phone every few seconds. Later that night, when she went to shower, I picked up the phone she'd left charging on the nightstand. Not to snoop, just to move it so it wouldn't fall. But the moment I touched it, a text banner flashed across the screen with a name I knew too well. "Jonah, did he believe you?" My stomach dropped so hard I literally sat down on the edge of the bed. My hands went cold. My mind froze. When Lila stepped out of the bathroom, steam rolling behind her, I was still staring at the wall, silently breaking. And that was only the beginning. I didn't confront her that night. I know most people think they'd explode, yell, demand answers, but when betrayal hits you that deeply, your mind goes strangely calm. Numb. Almost detached. I kept replaying that message in my head, "Did he believe you?" and something inside me quietly cracked. Lila came out of the shower humming, wrapped in a towel, completely unaware that my entire world had just shifted. I lay beside her pretending to scroll on my phone, pretending to breathe normally, pretending everything was fine. But inside, I felt like I was floating outside my own body. She curled up next to me, kissed my shoulder, and whispered, "Love you, good night." It took everything in me not to flinch. The next morning, I woke up to a message request from an unknown number. At first, I ignored it, probably spam. But the preview caught my eye. "You deserve to know." My hand shook as I opened it. There they were. Photos. Videos. Screenshots. Lila and Jonah entering a hotel lobby together. Jonah's arm around her waist. Lila kissing him in a dim hallway. Text messages between them laughing about how clueless I was. Messages where Jonah bragged about finally having what he wanted. One line burned itself into my brain. "Lila, he's too focused on that stupid house. He won't notice anything." I sat there staring at my phone until my throat went tight enough to choke me. My vision blurred. For a second, I genuinely thought I might pass out. My entire future, every late night shift, every dollar saved, every dream, suddenly felt like a joke they'd been laughing at behind my back. But instead of rage, what I felt was clarity. Cold, painful clarity. I realized that confronting them would only give them power. They'd gaslight, lie, pretend, twist everything. So I didn't confront. I didn't scream. I didn't break. I simply whispered to myself, watch. Don't react. Because from that moment on, I wasn't the clueless fiancé anymore. I was the man planning his exit. For the next few days, I moved like a ghost in my own life. Lila still kissed me goodbye before work, still laughed on the phone with her friends, still curled up beside me at night like nothing was wrong. But once you've seen the truth, you can't unsee it. Every movement felt rehearsed. Every smile looked painted on. Every I love you sounded like a line she practiced in the mirror before delivering it to the man she was betraying. I started digging, not out of obsession, but out of survival. At night, when she'd fall asleep, I'd quietly step out of bed and sit in the living room, scrolling through the evidence that kept appearing in my inbox. More screenshots. More hotel receipts. More messages between her and Jonah. One of them hit me harder than the rest. Jonah, he's too busy trying to impress you. It's almost sad. Lila, I know, but let him try. At least one of you is useful. Useful. That word sat in my chest like a shard of glass. During the day, I played the role of the devoted fiancé. I packed her lunch, held her hand in public, asked about her day. Every time she looked at me with that manufactured innocence, I'd force a smile and say, everything's good. But inside, I felt myself slipping. The rock bottom moment didn't come in a dramatic explosion, it came quietly, one night at 2 a.m. I was sitting on the kitchen floor, lights off, back against the cabinet, staring at the photos of her wrapped in someone else's arms. My chest felt heavy, like someone was squeezing the air out of me inch by inch. I couldn't cry. I couldn't breathe. For the first time in my life, I felt completely disposable. That night, I realized something. Lila wasn't the only person I'd lost. I'd lost Jonah too, the one person I trusted with every dream I ever had. By sunrise, the numbness faded, replaced by something sharper. Determination. And that's the moment I decided. If they thought I was clueless, I'd make sure they never saw what was coming next. By the time morning light crept into the apartment, something inside me had shifted. I wasn't the same man who cried on the kitchen floor at 2 a.m. I was still broken, yeah, but now the pieces were sharp, deliberate, arranged in a way that made me see everything with cold clarity. If Lila and Jonah wanted to play games behind my back, fine. I'd stop giving them access to the version of me they depended on. No more emotional support. No more predictable reactions. No more blind loyalty. So, the strategy started with silence. Real, calculated silence. I stopped initiating conversations. When Lila asked, "Are you okay?" I'd shrug and say, "Just tired." When Jonah texted, I'd leave it on read. When Lila kissed my cheek, I'd smile faintly but wouldn't kiss back. Nothing big enough to trigger suspicion, just enough to create a quiet distance. One evening, she waved her hand at me and said, "You've been quiet lately." I kept chopping vegetables and muttered, "Long week." "Do you want to talk about it?" she pressed. I glanced at her. "Not really." That answer seemed to confuse her. Lila was used to me oversharing, reassuring, explaining. She wasn't used to walls. I could see the way she hesitated, like she was trying to figure out which version of me she was talking to. Meanwhile, I began preparing my exit behind the scenes. I gathered my important documents, birth certificate, passport, bank files, slipping them into a folder I hid under the driver's seat of my car. I quietly transferred my savings into a separate private account. I updated passwords for everything personal. And most importantly, I finalized the paperwork for the house. But this time, it wasn't a gift. It wasn't a surprise for us. It was a sanctuary for me. Jonah tried to call me one night. When I didn't pick up, he sent a voice note saying, "Bro, haven't heard from you. Everything good?" His tone was too light, too rehearsed, like he wanted to check if I'd caught on. I didn't reply. For the first time in my life, the silence belonged to me. And I watched as both of them started leaning into the emptiness I left behind, not realizing it was only the beginning of my plan. Silence is a strange thing. At first, it feels like nothing, like an empty room or a paused conversation. But give it time, and it starts echoing. It starts crawling under people's skin. That's exactly what happened to Lila. Within a few days of me pulling back, she went from indifferent to restless. She hovered around me in the kitchen, lingered in the doorway when I watched TV, even sat beside me scrolling her phone without saying a word, like she was waiting for me to break the silence first. One morning, while I was grabbing my keys, she asked softly, "Are we okay?" I didn't look up. "Yeah. Why wouldn't we be?" Her voice wavered. "You just feel distant." I slipped my shoes on and said, "Maybe I'm just matching your energy." The way her eyes widened, like she'd been caught somewhere she didn't expect to be, told me everything. But I didn't give her time to respond. I simply walked out. Meanwhile, Jonah tried harder. He sent messages like, "Bro, miss you. You alive? Let's grab a drink." I left them all undelivered. No anger. No confrontation. Just absence. And that absence started eating at him too. Mutual friends told me he kept asking, "Has he said anything about me? Did I do something?" I almost laughed. Behind the scenes, I moved fast. I packed my essentials into boxes and stored them in my trunk. I moved valuables into the new house, my computers, personal files, childhood keepsakes. I rerouted my mail. I canceled shared subscriptions. And slowly, quietly, I pulled my financial support out from under Lila. No more contributions to utilities. No more half of the rent. No more savings transfers. At first, she didn't notice. Then one day, she stared at the bank app and whispered, "What the hell?" I watched from the hallway as she tried to make sense of the missing amounts, blaming the app, the bank, everything except the possibility that I had pulled back. Their lies started collapsing, not with screaming or accusations, but with my silence. And neither of them had any idea that the real storm hadn't even started yet. The funny thing about silence is that eventually people can't stand it, they'll force a confrontation just to break it. That's exactly what Lila did. She showed up at my workplace on a Friday afternoon, mascara smudged, hair messy like she'd rushed out the door without thinking. I was walking back from lunch when I saw her standing outside the building, gripping her phone like it was the only thing keeping her upright. The moment she noticed me, her shoulders dropped with visible relief, like she'd been holding her breath for days. "Why aren't you talking to me?" she blurted before I could even say hello. I looked at her calmly. "I've been busy." "Don't do that," she snapped, stepping closer. "You're acting weird. You're shutting me out." I shrugged. "You've been distant for months. Maybe it rubbed off." Her mouth fell open. "That's not fair." "Life isn't fair," I cut in softly. Her eyes darted everywhere, my face, the ground, the door behind me, like she was searching for the right version of herself to present. She lowered her voice. "Can we talk? Please?" I checked my watch. "I don't have time right now." Lila exhaled shakily, almost pleading. "I feel like I'm losing you." I gave her a polite, unreadable expression. "I didn't know you noticed." She stared at me like she was trying to read a language she used to understand but no longer recognized. And for the first time, I watched uncertainty flood her face, real uncertainty. The kind that comes from knowing you no longer have control over the person you thought would always be there. Meanwhile, Jonah tried a different tactic. He texted, "Bro, what's going on? Talk to me, man." Then another. "Did I do something?" And finally a call I declined without hesitation. But the real hit came later that evening when I got a new message from the same anonymous number. "You should know Jonah's been bragging. He thinks he stole her from you." I stared at that line until my jaw clenched. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was mockery. And in that moment, I knew it was time to stop watching quietly. Time to move to the next phase. I didn't react right away. That message about Jonah bragging sat in my chest like a burning coal, but instead of exploding, it hardened me. Whatever pieces of hope or nostalgia I had left, those tiny scraps that wondered if maybe this was a mistake, a misunderstanding, they died quietly. I finally understood that neither of them deserved an explanation, a confrontation, or even the courtesy of a goodbye. They wanted access. They wanted the emotional reaction. They wanted proof they still mattered. So I took that away. That night, while Lila was in the shower, I sat on the couch, opened my phone, and blocked them both. Not just on messages, on calls, social media, email, everything. I removed them from my location services. I deleted our shared calendar. I cut every digital thread they might use to pull me back. When Lila came out, hair dripping and wrapped in a towel, she said, "Can we talk tonight?" I stood, grabbed my keys, and said, "I've got something to do." Her voice cracked. "Where are you going?" I didn't look back. Out. I walked past her, past the life we'd built, past every lie I'd swallowed. And I didn't come home. Instead, I drove to the new house, the one she always wanted, the one I now claimed solely for myself. The air inside was cold and empty, smelling faintly of paint and new flooring. When I closed the door behind me, the silence felt different. Clean. For the first time in months, I could actually breathe. My phone buzzed nonstop for hours, unknown numbers, mutual friends, random calls that rang out into nothing. I ignored every one. By morning, I found out from a friend that Lila had shown up at my old apartment, pounding on the door, screaming, crying, demanding answers, only to find empty rooms and a landlord who told her I'd already handed in the keys. Jonah tried next, calling from different numbers, leaving voicemails filled with forced concern. I didn't listen to a single one. They wanted chaos. They wanted a scene. Instead, they got nothing. And nothing hurts a manipulator more than silence. The thing about people like Lila and Jonah is that they thrive in control. They need your reactions, your explanations, your pain, because it reassures them they still matter. So when I disappeared, truly disappeared, their lives didn't just get quiet. They started to unravel. I didn't see it directly, but the updates came slowly through mutual friends, each one painting a clearer picture of how fast their world was collapsing without me to anchor it. The first cracks showed when Jonah and Lila tried turning to each other for comfort. Apparently, the moment I vanished, their fun secret affair turned into a disaster. One friend told me, "Bro, they can't stop fighting. Jonah keeps asking her what she told you. She keeps accusing him of messing things up." I could almost hear it. Jonah shouting, "You said you had it under control." Lila snapping back, "You said he'd never find out. Why are you so paranoid?" It didn't take long for their guilt to turn into blame. Then suspicion. Then resentment. Meanwhile, without my financial support, Lila's comfortable lifestyle cracked open. She had bills she couldn't cover, appointments she couldn't afford, and a landlord who wasn't sympathetic to her tears. She tried telling friends that I had just abandoned her, but once pieces of the truth leaked, sympathy disappeared fast. People weren't pitying her, they were distancing themselves. As for Jonah, his downfall was even uglier. He started drinking more, missing work, lashing out. Mutual friends said he kept pacing around, muttering things like, "He's gonna ruin me," even though I hadn't done a thing. Guilt can destroy a person faster than revenge ever will. I stayed quiet through all of it. Not a message. Not a word. Not a single attempt to explain myself. And the strangest part? The quieter I stayed, the louder their destruction became. It felt like watching two people choke on their own choices. But I wasn't done yet, not with my healing, and not with the final chapter of this story. Because the greatest closure of all was still waiting for me on the other side of the door to that new house. The day I finally moved into the new house, the one Lila used to talk about with stars in her eyes, I walked through the front door carrying nothing but a single backpack. The air inside felt cold, untouched, and full of possibility. Sunlight poured through the big front windows she always wanted, lighting up the hardwood floors in soft gold. For a moment, I stood in the middle of the empty living room and just listened to the silence. It wasn't the suffocating, suspicious silence I'd lived in for months, it was peaceful. Clean. Mine. I spent the first few days turning the place into something I wanted, not what she dreamed of. I chose darker furniture, minimalist shelves, tech setups she'd have hated. I cooked dinner alone with music echoing in the open space, realizing I'd spent years bending myself around someone who never intended to stay loyal. With every box unpacked, every picture hung, I felt pieces of myself returning, pieces I hadn't even realized I'd lost. The climax came unexpectedly. I was parking my car in the driveway one evening when I saw Lila's car creeping down the street. She wasn't following me, just passing by, but the moment she saw me, her face broke. Her eyes filled instantly with tears, her jaw trembling as she slowed down, staring at me like she'd seen a ghost. Or a future she thought she'd own, slipping through her fingers. She didn't stop. She didn't roll down the window. She just drove away slowly, wiping her face, realizing the final truth. I didn't just leave her. I left her behind. Later that night, standing on the balcony overlooking the quiet neighborhood, I felt something settle in my chest, a calmness I hadn't felt in years. No anger. No regret. Just relief. I whispered to myself, "You finally chose you." And for once, it didn't feel selfish. It felt right. Revenge didn't come from confrontation or screaming. It came from walking away, building a life they can never be part of again. And in that house, the one she always dreamed of, I finally started living the life I deserved.